never imagined that the worst betrayal of my life would happen in a courtroom where I had spent 6 years dispensing justice. Sitting behind the judge's bench that Tuesday morning, I felt my world tilt when I saw a familiar name on the witness list. Barbara Thompson, my mother. The woman who raised me, who once bragged about my achievements to anyone who would listen, was listed as a witness against me in a case I was presiding over. Something felt terribly wrong, but I could never have predicted the devastation that was about to unfold. Before I share what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and please hit that like button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted most. This story gets much deeper than you might expect. Growing up in small-town Ohio, it was just my mother Barbara and me after my father passed away when I was 12 years old. Barbara worked double shifts at the local diner to keep us afloat, always telling me that education was our ticket to a better life. She would sit with me at our kitchen table every night, helping with homework under the dim yellow light of our only lamp. I was a good student, perhaps, because I had to be. Barbara made it clear that academic excellence was not just expected, but required. When I received a full scholarship to Harvard Law School, Barbara cried tears of joy. She called every relative, every neighbor, anyone who would listen to tell them her daughter was going to Harvard. For the first time in years, I saw genuine pride in her eyes. Law school was challenging, but I thrived. I graduated summa cum laude and landed a position at a prestigious firm in Columbus. Barbara would introduce me to people as my daughter the lawyer, with such obvious pride that it made my chest swell with warmth. 3 years later, when Governor Patterson appointed me as a judge at 32 years old, making me the youngest sitting judge in the state, Barbara threw a party in our small town. She invited everyone she had ever known. The first 6 years on the bench were everything I had dreamed of. I handled over 2,000 cases with care and precision. My courtroom ran efficiently, and I earned respect from attorneys and colleagues alike. The work fulfilled me in ways I had never imagined possible. Every morning, putting on my black robes felt like putting on armor designed to protect justice itself. But somewhere during those 6 years, something shifted in my relationship with Barbara. The proud mother who once bragged about her judge daughter began making subtle comments. "When are you going to settle down like normal people?" she would ask during our weekly phone calls. "Your cousin Jennifer just had her second baby. She seems so much happier than you." The pride in her voice when discussing my career was gradually replaced by concern, then disappointment, then something that felt dangerously close to resentment. Barbara started comparing me to other family members who had chosen more traditional paths. She would mention how my cousin David had a stable marriage and owned a small business. "He never has to deal with all that stress you carry around," she would say. "I worry about you, Madison. All that pressure cannot be healthy." What had once been supportive conversations became sessions where Barbara questioned every decision I had made since law school. The case that would change everything was Walsh versus Mercantile Insurance Company. Sandra Walsh, a 68-year-old widow, claimed that Mercantile Insurance had denied her legitimate claim after her house fire, citing fraudulent documentation. The insurance company countersued, alleging that Mrs. Walsh had deliberately set the fire and submitted false evidence. It was a complex case involving property disputes, insurance fraud allegations, and testimony from multiple expert witnesses. When I received the case assignment that Monday morning, it seemed routine. Financial disputes were common in my courtroom, and I had handled dozens of similar cases. I reviewed the preliminary documents and witness lists without much concern. Tuesday morning, as I prepared for the first day of testimony, I noticed Barbara Thompson listed among the witnesses for the plaintiff. My heart stopped. There had to be some mistake. I immediately called my clerk asking her to verify the witness information. She confirmed that Barbara Thompson from Millfield, Ohio, was indeed scheduled to testify on behalf of Mrs. Walsh. My mother lived in Millfield. This could not be a coincidence, but I could not understand how or why my mother would be connected to a case 3 hours away from her hometown, involving people she had never mentioned to me. The courtroom was packed that Tuesday morning. Mrs. Walsh sat with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Robert Chen, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics. The insurance company had brought their top litigation team. I announced the proceedings would begin and asked if there were any preliminary motions. That was when Chen stood up and dropped the first bomb. "Your Honor," he said with a slight smile that made my stomach turn, "we have been made aware that one of our witnesses shares your surname. We want to ensure there are no conflicts of interest." I felt heat rise in my cheeks as every eye in the courtroom turned to me. I had no choice but to acknowledge the potential conflict and ask Chen to explain the nature of Barbara Thompson's testimony. Mrs. Thompson will be providing character testimony about the plaintiff's reliability and truthfulness. Chen explained smoothly. She has known Mrs. Walsh for several months and can speak to her integrity. This made no sense. My mother had never mentioned knowing anyone named Sandra Walsh. But Chen continued. We understand this creates an unusual situation, but Mrs. Thompson's testimony is crucial to establishing our client's credibility. After consulting with both legal teams, we agreed that the proceedings could continue if I disclosed the relationship, and both sides agreed to waive any conflicts. I had no choice but to reveal that Barbara Thompson was my mother. The murmur that went through the courtroom made me want to disappear, but I maintained my composure and called the court to order. Chen called his first witnesses to establish the facts of the case. Mrs. Walsh testified about the night of the fire breaking down, as she described losing her home and all her possessions. The insurance investigators presented their evidence suggesting arson. Everything proceeded normally until late that afternoon, when Chen announced, "The plaintiff calls Barbara Thompson to the stand." Watching my mother walk to the witness stand was surreal. She wore her best navy blue dress, the one she saved for church and special occasions. She looked nervous, but determined. After being sworn in, Chen began his questioning, gently asking about her background and how she knew Mrs. Walsh. Barbara explained that they had met at a grief counseling group several months earlier, both having lost their spouses. Mrs. Thompson. Chen continued, in your interactions with Mrs. Walsh, how would you characterize her honesty and integrity? Barbara straightened in her chair and spoke clearly. Sandra is one of the most honest people I've ever met. She would never lie about something as serious as this. So far, everything seemed routine, even if painful for me to watch. But then Chen's questions took a different direction. Mrs. Thompson, you mentioned you have experience with people in stressful situations, making poor decisions. Can you elaborate? My mother's face tightened slightly, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Well, Barbara began slowly. I have seen how pressure and stress can affect people's judgment. Sometimes people make choices that seem right at the time, but cause problems later. Chen nodded sympathetically. Have you witnessed someone close to you struggle with maintaining stability under pressure? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I wanted to object, but Chen had not yet crossed any clear lines, and the insurance company's attorney seemed content to let him continue. Yes, Barbara said, her voice growing stronger. My own daughter has always had trouble with commitment and follow-through. She can barely hold a job for more than a few years before something goes wrong, and she has to move on to something else. The words hit me like physical blows. The courtroom was completely silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Chen pressed forward mercilessly. Can you give the court an example of this pattern of instability? Barbara looked directly at me for the first time since taking the stand, and what I saw in her eyes was not love or apology, but something cold and calculated. Madison has never been able to handle pressure well. In law school, she would call me crying about exams and deadlines. When she was at her law firm, she complained constantly about the partners and the workload. Now she sits in judgment of others, but she has never proven she can handle real responsibility consistently. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The attorney for the insurance company finally objected, arguing that this testimony was irrelevant to the case at hand. But Chen smoothly argued that Mrs. Thompson's observations about stress and decision-making under pressure were directly relevant to assessing Mrs. Walsh's state of mind during the insurance claim process. Chen was not finished. Mrs. Thompson, based on your observations of your daughter's career changes and reactions to stress, do you believe some people are simply better suited for positions of authority than others? Barbara did not hesitate. Absolutely. Some people crumble under pressure, and others rise to meet challenges. Madison has always been the type to crumble. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I felt physically ill. This was not just testimony. This was character assassination by the one person who was supposed to love and support me unconditionally. My own mother was systematically destroying my reputation in my own courtroom, but I had to maintain judicial composure even as my heart shattered into pieces. Chen concluded his examination with surgical precision. Mrs. Thompson, in your opinion, based on your extensive personal knowledge, would you trust someone with a pattern of instability and poor stress management to make important decisions that affect other people's lives? The insurance company attorney objected loudly, but the damage was already done. Barbara answered clearly, "No, I would not. Someone who cannot manage their own life consistently should not be in a position of responsibility over others." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. I struggled to maintain my composure as Chen thanked my mother and returned to his seat with obvious satisfaction. The insurance company's attorney stood to cross-examine, but before he could speak, the courtroom doors opened and Chief Justice Robert Harrison walked in. Every person in the room stood immediately except for me, still frozen behind my bench in shock. Chief Justice Harrison was an imposing man in his mid-60s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He commanded respect wherever he went, and his unexpected appearance in my courtroom sent ripples of confusion through everyone present. He walked directly to the bench where I sat, his expression serious but not unkind. "Your Honor," he said formally, "I need to address some statements that have just been made in this courtroom." I could only nod, still reeling from my mother's testimony. Chief Justice Harrison turned to face the courtroom, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years upholding justice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel compelled to provide some context for the testimony you have just heard regarding Judge Madison Thompson." Barbara, still in the witness stand, had gone completely pale. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the witness box. Chief Justice Harrison continued with devastating clarity. "The woman you just heard described as unstable and unable to handle responsibility has been a judge for 6 years." The words hung in the air like thunder. Chief Justice Harrison was not finished. "Judge Thompson has presided over more than 2,000 cases during her tenure. Her decisions have been appealed fewer times than any other judge in our district. She has maintained the lowest reversal rate in the state 3 years running. She has received the Outstanding Judge of the Year award from the State Bar Association for the past 3 consecutive years." I watched my mother's face transform from pale confusion to dawning horror as Chief Justice Harrison continued. "Furthermore, Judge Thompson has been nominated for appointment to our state Supreme Court, a nomination I personally endorsed based on her exceptional legal mind and unwavering commitment to justice. The governor's office is currently reviewing her nomination, which would make her one of the youngest Supreme Court justices in our state's history." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Chen looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mrs. Walsh stared at my mother with obvious shock and growing anger. The insurance company's legal team exchanged glances that clearly indicated they knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Chief Justice Harrison turned back to me. "Judge Thompson, given the extraordinary circumstances of today's testimony, I believe it would be appropriate for you to recuse yourself from this case." I found my voice finally, though it came out smaller than I intended. "Your Honor, I agree completely. However, before I formally recuse myself, I want to address the court regarding the legal issues that have been presented." I stood slowly, my legs shaking but my voice growing stronger. "Based on the evidence presented today, it appears that the plaintiff's attorney has engaged in a calculated attempt to manipulate these proceedings by calling a witness whose primary purpose was not to provide relevant testimony about Mrs. Walsh's character, but to attack the presiding judge personally." I looked directly at Chen, who had turned an interesting shade of green. "I am ordering an immediate investigation into how this witness was contacted and what arrangements were made for her testimony. If evidence of improper conduct is found, I will be recommending sanctions against counsel." My voice was steel now, every word measured and deliberate. "Furthermore, I am declaring a mistrial due to prosecutorial misconduct." Then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I looked directly at my mother, still frozen in the witness stand, and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Barbara Thompson, you are no longer welcome in my courtroom or in my life. What you have done here today is unforgivable." I removed my gavel and placed it on the bench with finality. This court is adjourned. The 2 weeks following that courtroom confrontation were the darkest of my adult life. I took emergency leave from my judicial duties while the state bar investigated the circumstances surrounding my mother's testimony. The investigation revealed that Chen had approached Barbara months earlier after researching my background and discovering her identity and location. He had paid her $5,000 to provide testimony designed specifically to undermine my credibility and fitness as a judge. The emotional impact of learning that my own mother had accepted money to betray me was worse than any professional consequences I might have faced. I spent hours in therapy with Dr. Sarah Williams, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma. The sessions were painful but necessary. Dr. Williams helped me understand that Barbara's actions reflected her own issues and resentments, not any failing on my part. "Your mother likely felt threatened by your success," Dr. Williams explained during one particularly difficult session. "Some parents struggle when their children surpass them professionally or socially. Rather than celebrating your achievements, she may have felt diminished by them." Understanding the psychology behind the betrayal did not eliminate the pain, but it helped me begin processing the grief of losing my mother to her own bitterness and jealousy. My colleagues in the judicial system rallied around me with support that surprised and moved me deeply. Chief Justice Harrison visited my office the week after the trial, bringing a handwritten letter signed by every judge in our district, expressing their confidence in my abilities and their outrage at what had occurred. "Madison," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "In 30 years on the bench, I have never seen anything like what happened in your courtroom, but I have also never seen a judge handle such an impossible situation with more grace and professionalism." Judge Patricia Collins, a mentor who had served on the bench for 15 years, invited me to dinner and shared her own story of family disappointment. My father never spoke to me again after I became a judge. She told me over wine and pasta at her favorite restaurant. He thought women had no business in courtrooms except as court reporters. It took me years to realize that his limitations were not my problem to solve. The investigation concluded within 3 weeks. Chen was sanctioned by the state bar and suspended from practice for 6 months. The case against Mercantile Insurance was reassigned to Judge Michael Rodriguez, who ultimately ruled in favor of Mrs. Walsh after discovering that the insurance company had indeed acted in bad faith. I learned later that Barbara had been forced to return the money Chen paid her and faced questioning about her role in the scheme. I never spoke to my mother again after that day in court. She sent letters that I returned unopened. She called my office repeatedly until I had my clerk screen all calls. 6 months later, my Aunt Helen called to tell me that Barbara had moved to Florida to live with my cousin Jennifer. "She keeps asking about you," Helen said carefully. "She says she made a mistake." I thanked Helen for the information, but made it clear that some mistakes are too devastating to forgive. The nomination to the state Supreme Court moved forward despite the controversy, or perhaps partly because of how I had handled it. Governor Patterson called me personally to express his continued confidence and to ask if I wanted to proceed with the nomination process. Judge Thompson. He said, "The way you conducted yourself under impossible circumstances convinced me that you belong on our highest court." I accepted the nomination gratefully. My confirmation hearings were scheduled for the following spring. During the months of preparation, I discovered strengths I had not known I possessed. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had also freed me from seeking approval from someone whose love had always been conditional on my willingness to remain smaller than my potential. I began mentoring young attorneys and new judges, sharing not just legal knowledge, but wisdom about maintaining integrity under pressure. The Judicial Ethics Committee asked me to speak at conferences about handling conflicts of interest and personal attacks. My story, painful as it was, became a teaching tool for others facing similar challenges. 1 year after the trial, I established the Thompson Judicial Ethics Scholarship, providing financial assistance to law students from low-income families who demonstrated exceptional character and commitment to justice. The scholarship was funded partly by my own salary contributions and partly by donations from colleagues who wanted to support the values I had demonstrated during my darkest professional moment. The day I was sworn in as the youngest justice on our state Supreme Court, I stood before hundreds of colleagues, attorneys, and dignitaries. Chief Justice Harrison administered the oath while my chosen family of judges, mentors and friends, watched with pride. The mother who should have been there was absent by choice, but the family I had built through shared values and mutual respect filled the courtroom with love and support. During my remarks that day, I spoke about the importance of choosing integrity over comfort, truth over family loyalty when that loyalty demands betrayal of principles. "Justice is not always convenient," I said, looking out at the assembled crowd. "Sometimes it requires us to stand alone to make decisions that hurt people we love, to choose what is right over what is easy. But that is precisely when our commitment to justice matters most." The lesson I learned from my mother's betrayal was profound and painful. Sometimes the people who should protect us become the ones we need protection from. But when you know your worth, when you understand that your value is not determined by others' opinions or approval, no one can diminish it. The mother who tried to destroy my career actually liberated me from the need for her validation. I never spoke to Barbara again. Some bridges are meant to be burned when they lead to places that harm your soul. My life became fuller and more authentic after I stopped trying to earn love from someone who was incapable of giving it unconditionally. The family I chose replaced the family that chose to betray me, and I found peace in that exchange. If you have experienced betrayal from family members or people you trusted completely, please share your thoughts in the comments below. How did you rebuild after someone you loved tried to tear you down? Have you found peace in cutting ties with toxic family members? I would love to hear your stories and support each other through these difficult experiences. Please like this video if it resonated with you and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they can survive even the deepest family wounds and emerge stronger on the other side. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is never determined by those who choose to diminish you. You have the power to build the life and family you deserve, regardless of where you started.